CGs, welcome. So glad that you've been able to tune in today. Now, here's the reality, right? I know that CGs have kind of taken some different shape, but wherever you are, whether you're sharing a cup of coffee or you're sitting virtually across a screen talking with a group that you know and have shared life with for a long time, we trust that in these times you'll be able to do some soul exploration and hopefully some sort of discipleship, some sort of building up, and we'll be able to pursue God in all things. Now, the question that we had today that really fueled our sermon was, how do you fuel your confidence in tough situations? Now, this is the last week of the series, God's Playlist, and we're taking this straight out of Psalm chapter 121, and I won't re-preach the sermon to you, but I will talk about it with you. Now, we got to look at what the psalmist says, and it's a familiar passage to a lot of us. He starts off with the first verse. He just says, I lift up my eyes toward the mountains. Where will my help come from? Now, listen, I love mountains. I think probably a lot of people do. And just like Pastor Chris was able to say, a lot of us have this kind of perspective of mountains, especially down here in a place we call the Valley, right, or South Texas if you're with Alice. We're not used to seeing mountains, and so we look at mountains as if they're this beautiful spectacle and this kind of thing that we aspire to get to visit and go see. It's a visual we're not used to, and so it provokes in us something that we desire. Now, when the psalmist is writing here, we don't look at, or he doesn't look at mountains like that at all. It's the wrong kind of take your breath away type of scenario. His situation is that when he looks at mountains, he looks at them as this big, daunting, treacherous, full of dangers and potential threats. And so when he cries out, where does my help come from? He's not saying this lightheartedly. He's looking at it from a situation saying, my current circumstance is full of potential dangers. I can't do this alone. I need to find some help. And so I just ask you where you are. Pastor Chris preached an amazing sermon, and I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that if you haven't. But the reality that we're forced to deal with, and that I need you to ask yourself, is, do you see any mountains ahead of you in your life? Now, Pastor Chris was able to kind of talk through some things like we see just kind of overtaking our culture and our time. And there's depression, there's anxiety, there's loss, there's the fear of loss, there's grief, and there's just the reality that many of us are facing trouble. And the question comes up for us that drove our sermon is, how do we fuel our confidence in tough situations? Now, I want to interrupt this portion of our community group just conversation, and I want to hopefully instill some sort of measure of biblical study for you, right? Here's a really simple thing I teach our students is just go to the text and read it, and then ask yourself, where do I see God in here? What am I learning about God in this situation? Now, one of the beautiful things about Psalm 121 is there's very specific statements that we can learn about the character of God. And so I'd encourage you to pause here and just work through these 8 verses and just highlight or make notes or just write down what you see about God. Now, as you do that, you ought to be able to come back, pick up this sermon, ask yourself this question: how do we fuel our confidence in tough situations? When we do this, what we're really forcing ourselves to do is to see our situations in light of who God is. Now, we see so much about the character of God. God is a protector. God will not allow your foot to slip. He does not slumber. He will shelter you. He will protect you from all harm. He will protect your life, and he will protect your coming and your going, both now and forever. So much of our situation starts to pale in comparison to the glory of God when we see our situations through the lens of who God is. Now, whenever I was a kid, there was the great theological teacher known as VeggieTales. And in kids ministry, we would watch these videos a lot. And there's one song that has stuck with me all these years, and it just says that God is bigger than the boogeyman. Now, it's funny to say, right? But as a 32-year-old man, I can remember that because it meant something to me at the time. Now, you think about it, and I'll think about it. In my experience with kids, you watch a kid have a temper tantrum. You watch a kid have a meltdown. You watch a kid just freaking out for no reason. It's because for kids, their current situation, their current circumstance is king. They don't think outside of what they're currently experiencing. And so this lesson that VeggieTales was able to teach me all those years ago has stuck with me because it was important in my development as a believer. It taught me to look outside of my circumstance to see that God is bigger than what I'm currently dealing with. Now, God is bigger than the boogeyman. It's funny. But when your perspective is filled with the boogeyman or the mountain, it's tough to remember that God is bigger. So community groups, I'll remind you today that God is bigger than your mountains. And what we found in this sermon is that God is not just bigger than your mountains, he's also deeply invested in your life. He is concerned with your comings and your goings. He is concerned with the details of your life forever. Community groups, as you work through these questions, I would encourage you to place your mountains before the feet of Jesus and watch how God does amazing things. I promise you, as you experience the fullness of God in these times, as you take your problems and lay them at his feet, God will in turn instill in you not just a perspective over your situation, but he'll instill in you his peace that helps you overcome and helps you see through the mountains that you are currently experiencing. Community groups, I pray that you be blessed in these times. I pray that God would also use you to be a blessing in the circles of influence that he's placed you in. You guys be blessed.